So the Paladins are one of the strongest and most fun classes to play as right now in Baldur's Gate 3. I'm using a Vengeance build that absolutely wrecks everything, has constant critical hits over critical hits, and tons of survivability and CC resist. This also uses the Vengeance subclass, so I'm going to show you everything you need to know about building it. Now for the character creation, there are a couple of options for the race that I recommend right now, either going with the Tiefling or the Half-Orc. Tieflings, if you go with the Zariel subrace, they get 2 Legacy of Avernus Smite spells at level 3 and level 5 respectively, which lets them have access to more abilities before needing a long rest. Orcs, on the other hand, have the Self-Resurrection and the super high crits provided by Relentless Endurance and Savage attacks. Whichever you pick, you cannot go wrong with either of these, so pick which one you find the best looking. Also, for the background, you have the option between Noble or Soldier. I picked Soldier for the additional proficiency to Athletics and Intimidation. Obviously, this build uses the Oath of Vengeance, which is even more focused on damage, buffs, and fear mechanics than all the other options, including having Inquisitor's Might from the very early on level 1 on a bonus action, which imbues your hits with extra radiant damage and also gives you a chance to daze enemies. However, later on, there's going to be 2 more that we will cover. Also, early on, I recommend a 16 and 16 into Strength and Charisma plus 14 into Constitution if you want to have a really optimal point distribution in your main stats. But let's go over the leveling process, because this is going to provide you better and better attacks and even feats to choose between, so here's how they look. At level 2, we get our first smite called Divine Smite, as well as the criticals and the reactions for that, so more on that in just a bit. In the meantime, for the fighting style, you will want to use the Great Weapon Fighting, as we'll exclusively use two-handed weapons such as great swords, and even get another feat later on that will buff the criticals on these types of weapons. As far as the starting spells, I always get the Searing, Thunderous, and Wrathful Smite for the extra access to burn damage, knocking enemies prone, and providing the fear debuff, so I'm always ready for any type of encounter. For the remaining slot, you can go with Heroism, for example. It can be great at preventing you from getting feared and also get some extra hit points. Shield of Faith can also be another great option. It buffs your armor class. However, if you get the Sword of Justice a bit later, you can get the tier version that pretty much replaces this. Or otherwise, Protection from Evil and Good also helps with resisting charms better. But starting level 3, you also get some of the Vengeance related actions, including the Vow of Enmity, which is going to give you an advantage on attack rolls. This can counter one of the negative effects you get from a very powerful feat in just a little bit, but also Abjure Enemy, which lets you frighten targets, even becomes easier for you to hit them, and they also cannot move. And Fiends and Undead also have disadvantage on the saving throw, so essentially you're reducing their resistances to this spell. But at level 3, you also get your first race smite with the Tiefling, which includes the Legacy of Avernus Searing Smite. So this is the same version as the Searing Smite you normally get from your class, plus some extra prepared spells to add some of the other spells on top. Now at level 4, I believe you get your first Oath charges. You also get some extra prepared spells, but the feats are going to be very important here. You can obviously go with ability improvements and gain 2 points into maybe Strength or any of the other stats you see fit. However, I want you to consider the Great Weapon Master. At some point, you will definitely want this, because this gives you an extra attack on top of what you already have. So this is going to make it so when you land a critical hit, or if you defeat a target with a melee weapon attack, you can make another melee weapon attack as a bonus action that turn. And coupled with the fact that you already get an extra attack at about level 5, you get 3 of them, if not even more, per turn. So let me show you exactly how crazy this is. Of course, this is a toggleable passive and it does have a slight downside. So when attacking with a heavy melee weapon you are proficient with, attack rolls take a -5 penalty, but their damage increases by 10. So to counter some of that, that's why I recommended the Vow of Enmity, so that you can increase your attack roll a bit and mitigate this, but Bless should work just as well. However, watch what happens when I use this and I proc 2 of the crits in succession. So I start with the first hit. This is going to trigger the Luck of the Far Realm. This is from the Tadpole skill line, so we're going to cover that in a bit. So bam, that's going to be the first crit, but this automatically crits and it triggers that passive we just talked about, which is going to ensure a second crit So we're gonna choose that, and look at that balance right there. It essentially one-shots a target. And by the way, I only consumed one of my attacks for this turn. I can do another one, possibly even another one after this, but usually it's just one more, and that can also crit too. Like for example, in this case, the second one also crits. Oh, and by the way, this also works on reactions. So if a target moves away from you, or you find other sources to trigger reactions, like having the command attack from Lae'zel, you can also have a chance to trigger a critical on that too, which further lets you provide an extra damage on that in the same turn. So you can see where I'm going with this one, but it's at level 5 when this build kind of rounds up perfectly. This is when you get your extra attack so that you can attack 2 times per turn, essentially increasing your odds way better, assuming that you don't use some kind of other action. This is also when you get your branding smite, both the one provided by the class as well as from the race. So these are separate, by the way, if you haven't noticed. In the case of the Tieflings, the Legacy of Avernus versions do not consume any of your spell slots, unlike the other ones. So what this means is that you can use the first one, and assuming that you already casted that, you still have the spell slot version to cast if you want to consume it too. This means you can literally go on for almost ever until you need to do a long rest again and replenish your spell slots. That is why this Paladin build has so much uptime on the battlefield. Oh, and by the way, for the critical hits, I recommend to set up your reactions and make the game ask you when you want to use them. You don't want to have it automatically, as otherwise it could trigger, for example, on an enemy that's about to fall down anyway. So you might want to just keep it for another one that might be full HP in the same fight. At level 6, you get some extra prepared spells and also access to the Aura of Protection. Then at level 7, I believe that you get access to the Relentless Avenger. Just gives you an opportunity attack. When you cast actually an opportunity attack, your movement speed increases by 4.5 meters on your next turn. That is actually huge. I think that that's a 50% buff to your existing movement speed. At level 8, you also get 2 more prepared spells and also access to your second feat. In this case, I went with the ability improvement and went with some extra points into strength and charisma. At level 9, you get Blinding Smite, a very strong attack that also blinds your target, so you're literally feeding yourself your own advantage on your next extra attack when you attack the same target. But also a bunch of very strong buffs here, one of which is the Elemental Weapon, gives a 1+ bonus to attack rolls and deals additional 1d4 damage of your choice, so it somewhat counters the effect of the Great Weapon Master debuff that we also get. You can also go with the Crusader's Mantle for the 1-4 radiant damage if you want pure damage, or Warden of Vitality if you want some extra utility. You can cast Restore Vitality as a bonus action to heal yourself or nearby allies. And by level 10, you even get an Aura of Courage that's going to help you against Fear effect, plus a second Lay on Hands charge so that you can heal yourself a lot more often in combat, or your allies. But if you want to go over the items, here's a quick look at that. I'm still keeping the Grimskull helmet, even though in theory the haste helmet is much better because it just gives me more movement speed at the start of a turn. But I like this one for the extra fire resistance. It still gives me that, also stacks with the one provided by my race. So in total, I have a double stack, which literally means I am able to face tank almost any fire damage. And usually I barely even get hit by it, since I'm constantly in melee range and other enemies almost always cast some kind of fireball or fire effect. This helps me completely counter that. I also got this cloak at some point, but I can't really remember from where. It does, however, provide me with some extra hit points there when I cast spells. Then we have the Adamantine Armor. We already talked about this. It helps a ton with damage mitigation, it prevents critical hits, even sends enemies reeling, that further reduces their attack rolls. The next couple of items are all from the Goblin Camp, so you get the gauntlets from the treasure chest behind one of the bosses, and it gives you an advantage on melee attack rolls while surrounded by 2 or more enemies. And the Linebreaker boots, a very strong option to have. If we use a dash or a similar skill, we gain Wrath for 2 turns, which gives us another bonus to damage with melee weapons. Unfortunately, I believe that on this playthrough I missed out on the Absolute Talisman that further increases our damage if we get to low HP. and one of the rings, I believe the Crusher's ring, which increases our movement speed. But otherwise, you can just use other options in there. They are definitely viable. However, if you want to truly bring this to the next level, also make sure to grab the Luck of the Far Realm. This is going to be a tadpole power, a mind flayer power, so you will need a couple of tadpoles in your brain to get this. But this is what's going to turn your successful attack rolls against an enemy into a guaranteed critical hit. And because we turn those into guaranteed critical hits, we also get the extra guaranteed bonus action and damage on top. So it kind of feeds into itself, constant damage up to 3 times in one single attack. I don't even think this has a cooldown, by the way. You definitely don't need a long rest to have it again. I believe it's once per fight, but I might be wrong on that one. It triggers very often before I even need to take a rest. That's all you need to know. And that's all you have to do. Just make sure that you have some kind of advantage against the target, maybe from another attack from a different party member, or maybe from one of your vows, and then just go ham in with one of the smite attacks. This is going to immediately proc that Luck of the Far Realm, which is going to guarantee critical hit. And after that, you're going to trigger the second critical hit, use that again, and the target should be down. And if it's not, too bad, it's going to be very close to being downed anyway. Plus, this also triggers on reactions, which makes it even more insane. And that's pretty much it with the video. I also suggest checking out my other guides. For example, I made one on some of the best early on armors, or you can check out some of the best starting races if you're just trying out to create your best perfect character. This is it. Thanks much for watching, and until next time.